The Injured Workers Action Group, or IWAG, has called for the withdrawal of a new compensation fund regulations, saying they are catastrophic. The new regulations were published in the Government Gazette last Friday. IWAG says they will be detrimental for medical service providers and vulnerable injured workers because they cut out agents for the repayment of claims. They're coming to effect at the end of the month. To discuss, we're joined by the spokesperson for the Injured Workers Action Group, or IWAG, Tim Hughes. Mr. Hughes, thank you for being with us. Firstly, for people who don't know, explain what the Compensation Fund is all about and who it should be helping.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you on this important issue. The Compensation Fund is designed to allow medical service providers to treat workers who are injured on duty. So every employer of a certain size and scale in most industries contributes a monthly amount to the fund, and then any worker who's employed by such an employer is entitled to go to a private medical service provider to be treated for an injury on duty, and that medical service provider is paid for their services by that fund.
Okay, so how do the new regulations prejudice medical service providers and the injured workers?
The problem we have is a systemic one in which the Compensation Fund for many years now has been dysfunctional. The delays in paying out are chronic. It means that many medical service providers don't use the services of the Compensation Fund. In other words, workers don't get their rights or what is due because medical service providers know that they won't get paid by the Compensation Fund, or they have to wait for a couple of years.
Yeah. So can you just explain? So you get injured at work and you go to a doctor and the doctor says, no, I can't help you because I know I won't get paid.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And remember, these, medical service providers have to pay their own bills. They've got rent to pay. They've got their, their educational bills to pay and things like that. And they've got other patients. So what's happened historically is that other people, banks and other third-party administrators have come in and said to doctors, medical service providers, look, we'll pay you upfront. We'll pay you what is due by the Compensation Fund, but you need to cede that claim to us. Allow us to process that claim, provide the administration, and the Compensation Fund will pay us. So you're okay. That's fine, except that the Compensation Fund in these regulations has now effectively stopped that practice from happening. Now the Compensation Fund says we will not pay these third parties or administrators or banks. We will only pay medical service providers. In other words, that whole sector that was assisting the fund, assisting MSPs, assisting workers, stand still.
Presumably, these financial service providers, third parties, will get paid. Is there any concern? Has there been any predatory behaviour on their part? They may want to get involved to make a lot of money.
Well, we've asked it's a great question, because we've asked the Minister of Employment and Labour, we've asked the DG, we've asked the Commissioner to provide evidence of any of these third-party administrators or pre-funding bodies being engaged in any fraud or corrupt practices. In fact, what we find is that they assist the fund. And so what's been interesting is in the development of this new bill, at no point did the Minister, DG, or the Commissioner say that they were going to introduce these regulations. And interestingly, they published the regulations the day after Parliament rose for recess ahead of the local government elections. So we think there may be a question about them acting in bad faith, and certainly in this regard, they've kept this away from Parliament, bypassed medical service providers, bypassed workers, and bypassed employers.
Yeah. And I mean, can you bypass Parliament? So these are meant to come into effect at the end of the month. How do you fight this? Can you stop it?
Yeah, that's another great question. Is that, Parliament obviously has oversight of the executive and has legislative responsibility. These are regulations, and the minister's empowered to pass regulations. Our point is, why were these regulations never discussed at any point over the past year or months? Why were they published a day after Parliament rose, when in fact they have exactly the effect that we were concerned about in the bill? So the difficult clause in the bill was removed by Parliament, and we wish to thank them and credit them for that. And yet a day later, the department, or in this case the Commissioner, the fund, inserts a clause that has exactly the same effect.
All right, we'll follow this fight. Thank you very much for the Injured Workers Action Group, Tim Hughes, spokesperson.